I have structured this session so that it is more not like a lecture, it's more like sharing and what we are actually expecting. The last round, I've actually asked from Dr. PC some of the examples of the works from Perdana in which you want to share with you. And we'll actually analyze what works and what doesn't work for you. So first of all, because all of you are working, right? So most of your materials or most of your presentation slides or boards are mostly from work. That means it's work-like. So I'm going to share my screen and I'm actually going to show you what other people actually has done. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So there are actually a few things here. No TC students here.
We only have one representative, Faiz.
Okay, no problem. So I've actually chosen structure it to be the work kind of layouts, and then after that we have got the pre-thesis followed by the thesis things of actually how we actually do presentation. So first, the first two slides I'm actually going to show you are some of the working slides we have when we are actually doing presentation in an office. How do we actually do presentation to an office? So this is actually one of the interim slides, very similar to what you're supposed to produce during thesis crit, interim thesis crit, but maybe we wouldn't actually talk about thesis crit anymore because it's actually final presentation. So this is actually on a school. It's actually by Judd Ingalls. This is actually a public facilities review committee. So this is actually one of the interim. So if you look, why I actually chose this is actually because I think his approach is actually very simple, it's easy, and his presentation slides are very clear. And clear to the point of how he actually wants to illustrate his intention. So because this is actually an interim slide, so you will see they will actually be talking about updates and schedules and the timeline, pretty much what you have actually done. And then they'll actually start with the overall design review. They will first recap what is actually their concept, what is actually their main idea of the project. And then they'll go to building organization. These are the diagrams in which we are actually looking at during your final presentation. So that it's actually easy to see and easy for a person to actually see when they are actually without the student, and easy for the student to refer to these kind of diagrams to illustrate to explain about their project as well. So if you look, building organization, actually they actually goes through, they usually use sections to illustrate. And then this is actually in slide format, how you actually lay out the things slide by slide so that you actually layer the spaces on the slide. But of course, when you actually do it on board, it's actually slightly different. And then the building section. So you see how from the simplicity, how you actually get the you build up from bubble diagram schematic section to your final build section. So this is the process of how you actually do presentation. And then you go to the plan, and then they start with the site plan, and then you see they actually start building their site plan going upwards. Most of us maybe are guilty of actually getting the plans directly from SketchUp, which is actually not correct. Because when you actually look at all this, they are all AutoCAD plans or a Revit or whatever. And then after that, it is actually made into presentation plans. Like this. Plans are actually all the annotation and the spaces. They are actually all properly labeled. And especially for for plans, the north point is actually very important, in which we normally don't do that. And of course, do you actually know what is missing on this site plan? Anyone? No one?
The north point.
Yes, the north point is one thing, the boundary line is actually missing, the setback line is actually missing. So this is actually probably for even for presentation drawing, you actually need the boundary line. So when we actually look at examples of all this presentation context, right, we need to be mindful of what our brief calls for. So yes, this pretty drawing is incomplete because it's actually without a boundary line and setback line. Okay. And then you actually start to look at the layers of the floor plans, and you see it is actually black and white, but they actually color-coded the spaces so that it's easy for you to pick up. So if let's say you're actually not coloring the entire thing and you're doing your plans is actually in AutoCAD, you should at least have this have a little bit of presentation graphics in it so that it looks complete with one thing. The second thing is when you actually put in your furniture layout, at least people actually know the scale of it. The scale of how the table against the space, like this. Let me actually just zoom in like this. So over here, they actually really even have the area in which probably for our presentation we don't need, but we should have furniture layout that's appropriate for the space. Okay. And then when you go up, you look at the layers. The furniture layout and the colors that actually put it are intentional so that you actually know the zoning, what classroom is actually for what kind of subjects or what kind of department. So it's actually very clear. It is the clarity in the design. Okay. So as you go up, you see it's very clear and very systematic. And then moving, they actually always have the sub page to actually bring you on to another page. So these are actually the clear interior views. So you see the actual layer thing with all this is actually the perspective now. Okay. And then after that comes the elevations. And then because this is actually an interim review, right? They actually go into materiality concept, in which like pre-thesis students, right? Because the concept that you have are basically quite schematic, but right, the architecture expression in addition to form should have material, but it actually depends on how much you actually want to present. So let's actually look at how they actually present the material. So they actually use a normal drawing and how to expand the material concepts using an elevation. I think this is pretty much working level kind of presentation. Nothing surprising. This is basic. And then they have the key interior views. And then here comes the concept, which is actually the terraces, because this project, if you see, it is actually like a building that's actually fanning out towards the top. So they have these terraces, diagrammatic forms, diagrams that actually show how the project actually evolved. So if let's say it comes to urban students, we're talking about how the ground floor is so important, or if let's say you're actually doing a 3-dimensional connectivity from certain major nodes, then these diagrams are actually very important. Also, you start how they actually terrace the thing, how they actually bring the park up, how they actually layer the walkways and put in the steps. And then they actually finish it with a very beautiful picture. So this is how you actually build up the momentum, the story of a concept in a very interim way. And then after that, this is like going into special studies after their terrace and everything, then they actually go into their concept, how they actually derive the concept with the regional landscape typology, how they actually see the layering. So you see how they capture landscapes in this using terraces planting strategy, how they apply all this, and how they use colors to do representation. If let's say you're actually doing special studies, we're actually expecting something like this so that it's easy to understand, it's not too difficult. But also depends actually what kind of special studies you're actually in. And then they go into landscape, like all these trees, ferns and everything, how all the ridges actually is being represented by different landscape. So if you have urban farming, for example, if we are actually talking about urban farming and the different kind of farms, don't you think we actually need an illustration like that to actually show how excited you are with your project rather than actually just talking urban farming? And these kind of pictures actually work to actually bring your audience to closer to what it will actually feel like in your proposal. And then you finish off with a site plan again, right? And all these kind of things are actually the rest of the comments that's during the design review committee. So I think it's not relevant over here. Yeah. So if you look, these are actually some of the models. I know that Pradana student actually does models, but I don't think you all actually do any models, right?
Yeah, we don't.
Yeah. So anyway, if let's say you have actually done your action plan, and if let's say you can actually capture something like this of the viewpoint, it is good to actually illustrate because you're urban design students. You can actually put all this in. Okay, I think that's it. Because this is actually a historical school, so they have all this sample of text and stuff. So far, everyone, pretty good?
Yeah. I have a question.
Yep.
So I want to ask if my concept is anchoring, and I try to elaborate it more related to the urban, like how it connects to the nodes, how the site, how the project building been locked to the site gradually, about the context. Is it all right?
Yeah.
So I don't relate it to the architectural form, shape.
You actually do not need to illustrate the connectivity because when you're actually doing architecture, right? You are how to say there are a few contexts you actually need to observe. When you're actually doing diagrams, you are looking at the macro context, meaning to say the site planning, right? But actually, if let's say it is actually an urban intervention, an urban project, by right, all your materials and everything should be related up to the materiality, if let's say you actually want to go to, but forms definitely will actually be related somehow because you're looking at the elevation of the building in relation to context. So I think it's somehow related. It's actually just the scale you are deriving the relativity.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is actually one of it. And then of course you can actually have another one. This is an interim workshop by SOM. You know our Menara Hapsing tree in KL, in Jalan Sultan Ismail. Okay, anyway, it is actually there. That thing is actually designed by SOM. If you have not been there, it has won many awards already. So this is actually the slide of one of the workshops. Okay, so even at an interim workshop, right, you see the completeness of how they actually start the thing by actually recapping their project summary. How many levels, the mechanical, what are the datums, what is actually the setback? How many, I mean the setback over here, the podium, how many levels, what kind of open space we are talking about. So this kind of summary is actually expected from you all when you actually do your, when you're actually trying to relate your project with the site boundaries and site information. But right, how many, what's the plot ratio actually you're doing, what kind of area you're looking at, how many floors are there, and stuff like that. Program analysis, if you see, this is actually the site plan. It's a very, very simple diagram, but yet it is actually, it has got information that we actually need to know. Okay, ingress and egress, very, very important. I have not actually seen any one of you actually presented this. Where's the drop off, where's the ramp in, and everything. Yes, you actually have the floor plans, but a diagram like this will really make the explanation much, much simpler, especially on the PowerPoint slide. And then you see when you actually go into detail, how many floors, your envelope size is, and everything, how many floors below. You see, it's basically just a SketchUp model, a colored SketchUp model that actually you layer it in information. It's not really any fancy stuff. It's really normal stuff. Okay. And then you talk about the views. And this is, and then they actually go into the concept. Next generation workspace for Hapsing. Youthful, collaborative, healthy, and a new way of thinking. So this tagline, I think is actually essential for you to summarize in one sentence what is it you are to propose for your thesis or pre-thesis. And then you see they come, it is very simple how they actually flash images. These are all your precedent studies of how they actually want it to be, like meeting rooms, workspaces. So they can actually, they actually bring you into what your imagination, I mean, what you imagine it to be. These are actually all your, all the little things that you actually want to put in. Okay, fitness, amenities, gardens, all this, these are actually really just images to actually bring you into the mood before they actually bring you to the ideas. So for this project, there's actually 4 ideas. And of course, as all the thesis students and the pre-thesis students, so far I've only seen you're struggling with 1 idea. So there's really not much exploration in that sense. I mean, you're actually just working on one and then you scrapped. So maybe instead of actually scrapping the idea, maybe you should actually put them as a design process so that you can let the audience know how much of design process you have put them in before you actually derive with the final design idea. So all this should be actually documented. And all this you see has got names like Hapsing Gardens, Kinabalu, you have got Yellow Meranti and the Living Wall. But when you actually look at here, it is actually the slide. But when the person is actually presenting the slide, will have their narrative to actually go with their diagrams. So you see how they actually do the explanation and how they actually put the images that actually goes with it. Okay, wait. The images that actually goes with it, and let me actually see. How do I rotate? Yes. Okay, yeah. So you see you have the diagram. And then after that, you have the actual thing. Rotate. Yeah. Okay. Floor plans with critical dimensions, all the space, and your key data with the massing. Very basic. So you see how the story is building. The next one is actually the rendering. Okay. Rendering, sorry. Rendering, and then putting it beside next to the context. And then the floor plan. But I think this is actually pretty common for office practice where you actually do all this, because these are the things you're actually looking at. You see, there's actually no furniture here. There is actually the North Point scale and all this information over here. And there comes fitting the furnitures in. So you see, it's really basic, but of course your floor plan cannot be like this, because you have already developed it to many months already. Then it goes to idea 2. And then you look at their image. And the thing actually repeats itself. Yeah, the thing actually repeats itself. The massing, the rendering, and then in context. So it gives you actually some kind of similarity when you go through all this. But this is actually when you have got a few ideas from one side. But now that you're actually looking at just one idea, so you at least have to do one set of this. Yeah. Photos and the views. The massing, the rendering, and the rendering in context. Floor plan, furniture layout plan. So you see, it's very consistent throughout everything. So it's actually this kind of consistency we are actually looking at when we are talking about doing your diagrams as well, so that people can follow the trails of thoughts and not guess what slide is actually next. Okay. Right. I think this is actually the same. So these are actually the 2 working files that we have. I have to show you that how design, foreign architect actually does to illustrate their presentation. It's pretty much getting the commoners or the layman to know how they actually stack the ideas, how they develop the ideas. Okay. So actually now I will actually go into the pre-thesis work of the Perdana. I've actually picked the thesis week and the pre-thesis week and the pre-thesis high, as well as for the thesis as well. Of course, when you're actually talking about an interim presentation, it's actually very different from doing a pre-thesis, because pre-thesis you are supposed to actually finish a report at the end of the semester, and there's actually a lot of research that are involved. So you cannot actually just take office templates and just reproduce them and call it a design proposal. Okay. So these are the boards for a weak student. So you need to actually ask yourself to whether you have got all the materials that you need to at least pass as a weak student or not. This is for pre-thesis. So you have this thesis. There are actually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 boards. Okay. So, and then how they actually lay it across. They will actually have their killer perspective, and whatever floor plan, north point, and then they actually talk about the main, a little bit of the history, the site, culture, and everything. So all this are actually being done in your previous slides together as a group work. So you should just actually compose them in. Site study. These are all the site studies that actually, if you actually see, it's just actually putting the slides inside the board. That's why this is actually a weak board. What she actually did was just to put all these things in. If you look at this, okay, even this you can actually see is directly from slides. Everything. Okay, if you look, and then after that they actually start putting the design drawing. Black and white. All this. And then the perspective. And then they actually have got a little bit of special studies here. Modular space arrangement. And then the views of this. All these are actually to comply to requirements. And then over here, I think this is the special study on the facade. Over here, just this bit. Okay. And then if you actually look at this, the development of the thesis problem to the proposal is actually all being squeezed in one small slide like this. All this. By right, this one should be actually the first slide, the first board to actually explain how from the thesis, what kind of things you have actually discovered on site, and how you want to translate it into architecture. If you look, all this all squeezed into here, and this section down here. Okay. And this is their second, I think this is actually their second set of slides, second set of boards. This is their second set of board. It's weird. Or maybe this is actually just repeat. Probably it might be a what's that? Finish to grade. Kind of. Finish to grade kind of situation here. In which you see it is actually a little bit more, there's a little bit more of composition to the slide with some perspective. Yep. This actually it. This is actually a weak pre-thesis. This person's PowerPoint they actually did not submit the PowerPoint for this person. So if I actually zoom in, at least in the second attempt, right, they actually have been layering certain things in the center to see how to actually see the relationship of the how the perspective relate to the objectives of the thesis, at least during the second stage. Yeah. So if we actually go to a pre-thesis high, we actually go to the PowerPoint first. If you look at the slide, everything is designed. Everything is actually graphical, no long paragraphs. If you see, everything is actually graphical. Important texts are actually being highlighted so that it's easier to explain together with graphics as well as images. Everything is infographics. The sources are actually there. So you know exactly where they pick this up from and not being made up ungrounded. You just look at the graphics, it's easy to explain and it's very clear when you actually see it on its own. No long paragraphs. Just look, market challenges, thesis statement, newspaper cuttings, the site, what is existing, the survey, all this, the issues, the aim, everything is actually building up to the thesis in which you actually need to put it into your report. After the aim, research questions and objective, it is actually clearly highlighted what are the questions and what are the objectives you actually need to achieve. And then the design concept. So you see there is actually always a keyword over here. And the keywords, the phrase, and then the description at the bottom. And then you look at how they actually develop the concept. Derivation of sustainability, the potential client, the target group, the proposed site, pretty much everything that you have done. It's just that your the way how you present them are in a very a lot of text, but here they actually summarize them. And then they go into design development. You see, it is actually very graphical how they actually do this thing. It's graphical so that you can actually lead on to the process of how you actually build out the messing. You look at the information, the natural ventilation, and everything. So these are actually just diagrams and SketchUp messing. This is the messing, this is the design approach. Contrast design, repetitive element, natural ventilation. So this guy is actually probably the macro context kind of planning, and this is actually the micro context kind of planning. And then from the micro context, you derive with the design strategies. What kind of design strategies you have? So it actually looks into accessibility and speed levels. Then they look at the physical market organization. And you look at how there is so little text here, but yet the slide is so clear. And you look the formation, more design strategies, case studies, more case studies, and then finally, this is actually more case study, and then finally you have the you actually have the proposal over here. The overall look and the building program, and then the schedule of accommodation. We have the vertical circulation, pretty much all these things needs to be inside because it's actually part of your requirement. And I guess sustainable design might be one of their special studies, right? And then finally are the floor plans, fully colored. So in a PowerPoint slide, right, the floor plans and the elevations and the sections are usually the appendix to the PowerPoint. What actually really helps to tell the story is through all the infographics, diagrams, and the diagrams to actually build up whatever story that you actually want to tell about the thesis. You see, all these are actually these are requirements. If you don't actually put diagrams in, right, this section is meaningless. It's actually just another section, because every drawing or every project actually needs all this basic stuff. Over in thesis and pre-thesis, the main thing we're actually looking at is how you answer your thesis objective. Not so much of how beautiful it is. It is about the usability and actually how you respond to the urban context for urban design students. Whether do you answer what you initially asked during the thesis question or not? Yeah. So all high grade pre-thesis and thesis students have got one similarity. They all have animation. So you have got the board, you have got the PowerPoint, and you have the thesis animation. So let's actually look at the board. This is actually a board. If you actually see, it's actually very different, very different from what you actually see in the PowerPoint. They have got all this killer perspective, the proposed site, and the caption of the proposal. And then you have this design concept, problem statement, design aim, and design objective. This one can be further improved, as in you actually summarize them to infographics. That will be actually easier to see, because when you are actually using your boards to do presentation, generally people don't read the text because they will listen to you. If you want people to listen to you, then you don't read the text. But you see, they have actually layered all this thing in to one slide, and how they actually. So this is actually the text form, and these are the diagrams that actually do the representation of the design development. So you see, when you actually follow step by step, it's actually very clear the development of your design proposal. It responds to whatever background studies and research that you have actually done. And then comes all this scaled drawings that is part of the requirement. Yeah. So when you look at it, this is actually the complete drawings, and how they actually illustrate the spaces of interest within the project. And here, the exploded axonometry to actually illustrate the vertical circulation of the space. And if you look, this is the section for requirements. This is the section for presentation. You see how much of information they actually put in. All these sustainability strategies as compared to as compared to what you have here. This is just basic section elevation. Basic, and this is actually with information. So far, any questions? No questions? Everyone actually understand what's the expectation of the presentation?
Yeah, but I read again the checklist. I find out that the digital slides is optional. So does it mean that we can focus more on the presentation board?
Can basically the presentation board, if you actually look at it, it is pretty much standard composition of your requirement and what you how to say, what material you actually need to help you with your presentation and to tell your story. Yeah. So if you actually look at this, right? During the presentation, you need to actually know which board actually goes to where, so that it actually accompanies the flow of your presentation. And if you actually look, this is pre-thesis, and then if you actually go to the thesis, this is actually the thesis student. If you actually look at the boards, it's actually just two slides only. Okay. So you talk about the side, and then you have got this incomplete isometric, and then the words over here that does not, you can't see. You can hardly see because the words are actually so small. Nobody actually reads this. And then you have got crops of your slides over here. Some perspectives that are not really labeled. Yeah, perspectives that are actually not labeled. And sections and elevations that are without line weight. Yeah. So this board is to comply to what you actually need to submit. But it does not help you in your presentation. You get what I mean? Okay. So a good board actually should be composed of all the requirements plus the diagrams for the presentation. Okay. So if let's say you actually don't want me to go through the PowerPoint, it's actually fine. I think this, you have actually seen this before. So usual, a lot of text. So many texts. All this is actually weak. Okay. And missing stuff. So if let's say you actually want to see a good board, this is actually a board for thesis. Okay. This is actually the second board. This is the first board. This is actually a board for thesis. You see actually how they lay off all the boards. So what is actually for requirement is probably just these guys over here. Okay, these guys over here. And these guys are the one which are actually telling the story. And these guys, these perspectives are the one that's actually telling the ambience. These are probably the materials are actually done in PowerPoint first before they actually shift it into this manner. So you will see their concept of plan, adapt, join, and this youth center over here. And then they have the exploded isometric together with their site context. And then their site study on massing, their site study on plan, and the rest of the plans. And then after that, you have more isometric over here. So you will see how they actually look at the boards. They actually look at all the boards in totality, how they compose it to help them with their storyline. So they have got studies over here, bomba requirements over here, all these building services over here, special studies, special details, and then their big section to actually show the big section to actually show what kind of things are actually inside. Yeah, this is actually TC students. So if you actually look at their PowerPoint, right? This is actually the PowerPoint, and I would actually just go through the PowerPoint for you to actually see how they compose this information into the board for their storytelling. Here you see how they first start with pictures, the site condition issues. If you look at the traits of being a good thesis, all these slides are all diagrammatic form to be actually easy. And then you look at their thesis proposal. And their focus study, objective, concept, design strategies, and attributes. So you see how they actually come up with their diagram to actually show how they actually do blending. Local material, shape, scale, courtyard design. These are the fine grain, they call it fine grain design. That means that you're actually looking down into local materials and how, and every one of this, it is actually a study. If you look at this, and the similarity is the slide actually repeats, the format is constant. So what is actually easy is how they arrange their thoughts so that it is in point form, so that you can actually use the representation to explain the design on how you actually achieve the thesis, your thesis objective. So you look at all this, it actually covers all program activities, and you they cover architecture. They actually use words like this, how to actually explain their design. And all these diagrams, once it's actually being done, it can be composed in board format or PowerPoint format. So you actually see, it is actually just a series of diagrams. But of course, this is actually for thesis stage. For pre-thesis stage, you actually refer back to just now what I showed earlier, because these are very in-depth study. So whatever you see in front is actually summarized in the last page, the design strategy, objective, concept, strategy. So you see the entire thing is actually very structured. So this is actually the summary we are looking at, because if let's say you're unable to derive this, it just means that you actually have not answered your thesis objective. And then this is actually the pictures of the scale model. Details. And the animation. These are very, very important synthesis diagrams that shows how much your understanding of your proposal to answer the thesis objective. All this. Yeah. So this is it. So you look at actually how they actually put it onto the board. It's essentially the same thing in the PowerPoint, but of course the composition is completely different. Composition, content the same, the content the same, the composition is different. I mean, the perspectives are actually lined up to actually lead the way how before you enter the site, when you're approaching the site, and the different actually areas at the top, and the design strategies are actually all lined up here. And the introduction, exploded isometric, and then after that you look how they actually bring you through all the perspectives throughout the entire site, exploded isometric, and then after that your thesis statement and your concept, your aim and everything, all the requirements, special details, and all this schedule of accommodation. Yep. So I think I've actually covered for both thesis and pre-thesis the samples that we are actually looking at, and what kind of standards we are actually looking at. Yeah. Where is my thing? That's weird. Yeah. So this is what I have. Do you guys have any question? Or do you actually need me to explain on anything? Yes, no? Nothing? If nothing, then we'll just end the lecture. Let's say I have got nothing to ask. Or is there anything else you want to know?
I think I have a question on the precedent study or the case study. Usually, how do we present it more in the appropriate way? We just show the diagram, or the
Precedent
perspective
studies,
of what. Yeah. We just show the image to show what our idea, what we have inspired, or we need to do some analyze diagram on how we analyze the case study. Is it needed?
Okay, then we actually just look at pre-thesis high for PowerPoint over here. How they actually analyze case study. They don't have case studies over here. Yes. Yeah. So you actually look at your case study. At least the basic stuff, you actually need to know where the studies, what's the typology and everything. And then what is the key thing that you actually want to highlight about this case study? So like this square in Perth over here, it designs features to organize foot traffic. And the active retail outlets and passive landscape elements work to engage with the public within the space. So you actually probably show what is relevant is actually the section to actually show that to bring up the design feature that you want to refer to. So it's actually different. You don't need to do diagrams. You actually need to pick up what kind of feature you actually want to show, so that when you actually put the thing that you want to study against the design. Yeah, so you see, this is actually the keyword. And these are the illustration of the images of how things actually work. Second case study is actually what he picked, the basic information, what is the design feature that he actually wants to share or to showcase here to amplify the contextual regionalism. And down here, you actually see what kind of forms, the images, and also the plans. So it really depends on actually what you want to show. Sometimes you actually want a present study to actually just show a certain special detail, right? Then you will have the basic information, who is the architect, where's the site, how big is it, what kind of typology. Then you actually zoom in into your detailed design. What kind of special design, let's say for shading, for example. If let's say for shading, if let's say it's to block how many percent of sun that's actually coming in, then you actually need to find more studies in that particular area. Yeah, do I actually answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Anyone else? Everyone is clear of what to do for final presentation, yeah? If there's no more questions, then the lecture will stop here.